Hello there. So this is this week's video for Soc theory, and today we're going to talk about French structuralism, and then I'm going to set up what will be your guys' discussion of post-structuralism after this. So you guys got most of the important content for Saussure, but I'm going to go over it again just in case some of you missed it. As well as bring out some things that are just a little slightly different, that are kind of significant for understanding what people are going to be doing with Saussure in a little bit. Because when we get to post-structuralism and then postmodernism, most of it's based off of Saussure. So you guys have the parts of the sign pretty well. Our language is filled with signs, and signs are essentially this combination of a signifier and a signified. Signifiers are the sounds or the symbols in writing that are utilized, and the signified is the thing that they stand for. So, when we say the word tree is the signifier, the noise, right? The physical tree itself is the signified, or at least the construct of the physical tree in our mind. So that's the signifier, that's the signified, and that's the relationship between them. Together they make up signs. While it's somewhat personal and individual, as in like what pops into my head when I say the word tree might be slightly different than what pops in your head when you say the word tree. By and large, it's the same, right? So it's somewhat individual, but it's mostly cultural, it's mostly shared, it's mostly embedded in the language itself. That languages are, for Saussure, a system of signs, which also means that the signs are not separate from one another, but they're interrelated. So within a system of signs we get sort of the breadth of things we can talk about in our language, as well as the relationship between different objects. And we'll see what that means, what I mean by that in a little bit. It's another aspect of the sign that you guys picked up on, but we should probably flesh out a little bit more, is this idea of the arbitrariness of the sign, that a sign is arbitrary. And when we say that a sign is arbitrary, the part that you guys really picked up on is that the sound is arbitrary. So there's nothing about the sound tree that means tree. So the sounds could change out if we called, if we called a tree, a cat, it would still be a tree. So in that way, like the noises we make, the signifier or the signifier is arbitrary, but the signified is also arbitrary, meaning the thing that our words mean is also arbitrary. So how can we say that? Like, and we shouldn't. This isn't Saussure. Definitely isn't even as extreme as Kant, who we looked at before. So for Saussure, it's not that reality isn't really out there. Or anything like that. That's not what he means by the arbitrariness of the signified. And so what he means is that our language understands things by taking parts of what is sort of a fluid reality and breaking it up into categories. That's mostly, so we have geographical elements of our world, we have plants, we have animals. The lines between them are more fuzzy than our language that expresses them. So the way in which our language breaks up reality is arbitrary. I think that becomes clear if we take an example. So one of the examples that Saussure uses, I think it's probably the clearest of these, is the example of the words we use for bodies of water. So if we were in France and speaking French, we wouldn't understand bodies of water the same way. So as an English speaker, um, I have something that I mean specifically by a river and a stream. Both of these are bodies of water that flow, but we essentially in English break them up by size. So, bodies of water can be distinguished between ones that don't flow and ones that do flow, lakes versus rivers, ponds versus rivers, but also by size, right? Lakes versus ponds, rivers versus streams. Um, these distinctions aren't the same in French as they are in English. So in French, the distinction between different flowing bodies of water doesn't happen with size at all, but whether or not it leads to the ocean. So it can be a really, big, like what we would call a river. It can be very small, like what we call a stream, but it'll have one name if it hits the ocean and another name if it doesn't. So its destination is how they break up reality, which means that when they look at a flowing body of water, they're going to think about the flowing body of water. What the flowing body of water will call into mind will be the distinction that they make in their language. So it's hard for me to look at, right? I can if I really try, right? But it's very hard for me to look at a flowing body of water that's small and not think in my head stream. It's very hard for me to look at a flowing body of water that is quite large and think of it as anything but a river. So that's kind of how language works for Saussure. Language is always breaking things into categories. That's why he wants to call them a system of signs, is that one sign is interrelated. So the word river is interrelated to the word sign. It is, but the word river is interrelated with the word stream, right? In that together they become a kind of like they become one predetermines the other. But also, like, if we think about, like, there's a lot of very common within English size distinctions. So us understanding a river and a stream as separate things is not separate from us understanding a pond and a lake as a separate thing, which is not separate from us understanding a tree and a shrub from a separate thing. All of these things have to do with us using a specific interpretive frame that is given to us by our system of signs, which is a system of signs that, in this example, gives prevalence to size. So that's kind of how Saussure would work. So it's important to understand the way in which the different signs within the language interrelate with each other, in particular in creating distinctions. Distinctions are very important in structuralism, and they're very important in post-structuralism. So that idea of making distinctions, of breaking up reality. Okay. So that's Saussure. But Saussure is only interested in this in terms of language. He's not interested in it in terms of anything else. So that's what, for our second reading, we have Levi-Strauss. And Levi-Strauss is arguably the founder of perspectives that grow out of Saussure, what we would refer to as semiotics. And this would also, post-structuralism is also a form of semiotics, as well as a lot of postmodernism. So the two perspectives that are coming up are forms of semiotics, largely. So what Levi-Strauss is doing is he takes those basic insights about the signs breaking up reality, them existing within symbols, and then he interprets aspects of culture as being fed through those linguistic symbols, that system of signs. In particular, I gave you a section where he's talking about mythology. So if we think about how, if we would, maybe not today, but at the time of Levi-Strauss, if we were to talk about mythology, the immediate thing that would pop into our heads would be things like Greek mythology. In Greek mythology, there's sort of like these stories, right? And we would just read them as stories. And we kind of have this assumption that all these cultures have these mythoses that are stories that aren't really real. and are somewhat obviously so. And same thing like, if we take, something like Native American myths, right? People often read them this way. That's a pretty divorced way of reading and understanding myths, is Claude Lévi-Strauss's point. That myths are actually active things, but we have to understand how the symbols are being played with to see them. As well as the rituals that animate them. In a living culture, a myth takes on a completely different thing. And Saussure doesn't just do this with myths, he does this with all sorts of different aspects of culture. So really, Lévi-Strauss's point is that if you take something within culture and you don't understand how it's embedded within these sort of systems of signs, essentially you're just categorically misinterpreting the content. You're only understanding what happens in another culture through your own system of signs, which is not actually adapted to understanding what's going on in theirs. Another way to put it is, for Lévi-Strauss, he wants to claim that because language is a system of signs, everything within culture does not cross very easily. It has to be translated. You have to understand it within that system of signs and then sort of like alter it to understand it within your own. So basically what he wants anthropologists in particular, but anyone who's studying other cultures to do, is to understand and break them down into those different systems, right? To see how the symbols are being played with. So every aspect of a myth. So this kind of makes sense of like, often when we read myths, particularly myths of sort of like, non-modern, small-scale societies, we're often confronted with stories that seem on the surface to us pretty unbelievable, pretty strange. The way that animals are being used, anthropomorphized animals, things like that are really off-putting. But if we feed them through a system of signs within their own culture, so much more packed meaning starts being brought out. So the act of sort of taking those symbols, taking those, whether we're doing it for our own culture or another, but taking those symbols and then understanding their place within a system of signs, within systems of difference, within the way in which we code and understand the world, right? Essentially pulls out all these meanings that we may not even be completely aware of, because they're so, if we're talking about our own culture, because they're so ingrained in us. And the people of other cultures often aren't aware of them because they're so ingrained in them. And it takes somebody to actually like do this sort of like work of deconstructing. That's often a word that gets used, deconstruction. We're going to see that more in a different context with Derrida. But deconstructing the meaning of the text. And so all that language, all that way of thinking about it. So if you guys ever take a literature class or an art appreciation class or something like that, they use semiotics all the time, and you can see that in this sort of like them teasing out all these little meanings. Like that's something that very much so is ushered into those disciplines via Saussure's work on language and Lévi-Strauss's work in anthropology, via French structuralism. Okay. So first of all, next week, if you may be watching this the Monday after Easter, and if so, that's great. On the syllabus, Easter is off, so you technically don't have to do anything. If you want to post early or reply early, that's totally fine. But I'm giving you guys Holy Week off. Since we only planned for half of a week anyways, and we're kind of ahead because we don't have, as much to do with the presentations. So anyways, so for either next week or the week after, you guys are going to be looking at the two major figures of post-structuralism. There's a lot more. In fact, if you just in case you're curious, a lot of my own work grows out of post-structuralism. So I do a lot of post-colonial stuff, which is a more empirical application of post-structuralism. But anyways, you guys are going to be looking at post-structuralism, particularly the work of Derrida and Foucault. Really what I want you guys to see is the ways in which post-structuralism is taking some of those ideas that we were working with already with Saussure, and then sort of like Saussure and Levi-Strauss, and then sort of finding how power relates to it. That's really what makes post-structuralism different. Post-structuralism is all about power. It's all about hierarchies and how these things are written into the codes of our language, right? The signs and symbols that we use. So that's what's going to be distinct about post-structuralism, is that aspect of power. So if you think, just so you keep the map in your head, what we're going to see is we're going to see that you have French structuralism, sign, signifier, systems of signs, arbitrariness of signs. That's where that comes from. And then the two theories that are going to grow out of that are post-structuralism, power is embedded within that system of signs, and then postmodernism, in which it talks about how the systems of signs are changing. We'll get into a little bit. Most of you have probably heard the phrase postmodernism, but unfortunately what you heard about postmodernism is probably false. There's a lot of misunderstanding of postmodernism, and we'll get into why, and that's going to be in a couple of weeks. That'll be after the week after post-structuralism. Okay, great. So I'll look forward to seeing your guys' comments on Foucault's Order of Things and Derrida's Grammatology. Until then, stay safe. Have a good Easter, etc. And I'll look forward to hearing from you soon. Have a good day. Bye.